Have you ever heard of the time of the Judges? It was a long time ago in the land of Israel. God's people, the Israelites, had just arrived in the Promised Land. This land was a gift from God, a place overflowing with milk and honey, but there was a problem. The Israelites kept forgetting about God and doing things their own way. When they disobeyed God, bad things happened. Other nations would come and attack them. The Israelites would cry out to God for help. God, in his endless mercy, would raise up special leaders called judges. These judges were brave and strong. They rescued the Israelites and brought peace back to the land. But this peace never lasted. The Israelites would forget God again, and the cycle would repeat. One of the most difficult times during the period of Judges was when the Midianites came knocking. They were relentless and showed no mercy. They were fierce warriors who swept into the land like a plague of locusts, consuming everything in their path. Imagine a swarm of locusts, devouring everything in their path, leaving nothing but bare fields. The devastation was unimaginable. That's what the Midianites did to the Israelites' crops and livestock. They left nothing behind, taking everything of value. Year after year, the Midianites returned. Their raids were relentless, and the Israelites lived in constant fear. They plundered the villages, stole their food, and drove the Israelites into hiding. The Israelites had no peace. They were like bullies in a schoolyard, taking what they wanted and leaving the Israelites trembling in fear. The Israelites were desperate and felt utterly helpless. They hid in caves and mountain strongholds, afraid to even come out and farm their land. Their lives were filled with dread and uncertainty. Can you imagine their fear? Every day was a struggle for survival. Their once abundant land was barren. Their storehouses were empty. Their spirits were crushed. The land that once flowed with milk and honey was now desolate. They cried out to God, begging for a deliverer, someone to save them from this terrible oppression. Their prayers were filled with hope and desperation, longing for a savior to bring them peace and restore their land. Our story takes us to a young man named Gideon. Now, Gideon wasn't a prince or a mighty warrior. He was a farmer, the son of Joash from the tribe of Manasseh. We find Gideon hiding from the Midianites, not in a cave or mountain stronghold, but in a most unusual place, a wine press. Gideon was threshing wheat, not in the open fields as usual, but in secret, hidden inside the wine press. He was trying to protect his meager harvest from the greedy eyes of the Midianites. But Gideon wasn't just hiding from the Midianites, he was also hiding from something else. God's call. God knew that Gideon was the right person to deliver Israel from the Midianites. But Gideon, he couldn't see himself as a hero. As Gideon threshed his wheat, feeling small and insignificant, a most unexpected visitor arrived. An angel of the Lord appeared to him. Can you imagine? An angel, a messenger from God, appearing before Gideon. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior," the angel said. Now, Gideon must have thought the angel had the wrong address. Mighty warrior. Gideon was anything but. He was hiding from the Midianites, for goodness sake. "But, sir," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about?" Gideon was full of questions, full of doubt. He was focused on the problem, not on the problem solver. But God was not put off by Gideon's doubts. God, in his infinite patience, listened to Gideon's doubts and fears. Gideon, a man chosen by God, was filled with uncertainty and needed divine reassurance. He knew that Gideon needed reassurance, a sign to confirm that he was truly called by God. Gideon's heart was heavy with the responsibility placed upon him, and he sought a clear sign from the Almighty. So God gave Gideon a rather unusual request: the fleece test. This test would serve as a divine confirmation of God's promise to save Israel through Gideon. Gideon asked God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor." This was a bold request, but Gideon needed to be sure. "If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said." This would be a clear sign of divine intervention. And what do you know? God honored Gideon's request. The next morning, Gideon found the fleece soaked with dew. The next morning, the fleece was wet with dew, so much so that he could wring out a bowlful of water from it. This miraculous sign was undeniable, but the ground around it was completely dry. This was exactly what Gideon had asked for, a clear and unmistakable sign from God. But Gideon, still battling his doubts, asked for another sign. His human nature craved further confirmation. This time, he wanted the fleece to be dry and the ground around it to be wet with dew. This second test would leave no room for doubt. Again, God, in his incredible patience and love, granted Gideon's request. The next morning, the fleece was dry, and the ground around it was wet with dew, confirming God's promise once more. Now, you might think that with all this reassurance, Gideon would be ready to charge into battle, right? Well, not so fast. Despite the divine signs and encouragement, Gideon's heart was still heavy with doubt and uncertainty. Gideon still had his doubts. He was a man of faith, but the enormity of the task ahead weighed heavily on him. He sought further assurance from God, praying earnestly for guidance and strength. But God, in his wisdom, had a plan to not only deliver the Israelites, but to also build Gideon's faith and demonstrate his power to all. This plan was not just about winning a battle. It was about transforming Gideon into a leader who trusted in divine power over human strength. God instructed Gideon to gather an army. This was the first step in a divine strategy that would unfold in unexpected ways. Men from the surrounding tribes of Israel responded to Gideon's call, eager to be free from Midianite oppression. They came with hope in their hearts and a desire to reclaim their freedom. Soon, Gideon found himself at the head of a force of 32,000 men. It was a formidable sight, a sea of warriors ready for battle. But God had other plans. He saw beyond the numbers and knew that true victory would come from faith, not sheer force. He told Gideon, "You have too many men." This must have been a shocking revelation for Gideon, who was already anxious about the upcoming battle. God knew that if they won with such a large army, the Israelites would become proud and boast, "My own strength has saved me." They needed to understand that their deliverance would come from divine intervention, not their own might. So God instructed Gideon to whittle down the army. This was a test of faith for Gideon and his men, a challenge to trust in God's plan over their own understanding. First, he sent home all those who were afraid. This significant reduction in numbers was just the beginning of God's plan to show that victory comes through faith and obedience. Now, despite the dwindling numbers, something was changing in Gideon. With each test, with each sign, with each instruction from God, Gideon's faith grew stronger. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't his battle to fight, but God's. And if God was on his side, what did he have to fear? God gave Gideon a plan, a most unusual plan. He divided the 300 men into 3 companies, each man armed with nothing more than a trumpet, a clay jar, and a torch hidden inside. Can you imagine that? Going to war with trumpets, jars, and torches. No swords, no spears, no chariots. But Gideon, now emboldened by his growing faith, obeyed. He was ready to face the Midianites, not with his own strength, but with the strength of the Lord. Under the cover of darkness, Gideon and his 300 men crept towards the Midianite camp. The Midianites, unaware of the approaching threat, were camped in the valley below, their vast numbers spread out like a sea of tents. They were confident, arrogant, and completely unprepared for what was about to hit them. Gideon, following God's instructions, positioned his men around the Midianite camp. He could hear the sounds of the Midianite soldiers, their voices a jumble of foreign tongues, their movements a rustle in the night. Taking a deep breath, Gideon looked at his men, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of the moon. It was time. "Do everything you see me do," Gideon whispered to his men. Then, raising his trumpet to his lips, he blew a mighty blast. The sound echoed through the valley, shattering the stillness of the night. The other 299 trumpets followed suit, creating a cacophony of sound that reverberated off the hillsides. Simultaneously, they smashed their clay jars, revealing the blazing torches within. "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon," they shouted, their voices a chorus of defiance against the darkness. The effect was instantaneous and utterly chaotic. The Midianites, startled awake by the sudden noise and light, panicked. They stumbled out of their tents, blinded by the torches, deafened by the trumpets, their minds confused and disoriented. They turned on each other, their swords finding their own comrades in the darkness. Gideon's story is a testament to God's power and faithfulness, but it's also a story about overcoming fear and finding courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Gideon teaches us that it's okay to be afraid. He was terrified, But God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. Gideon's transformation from a fearful young man hiding in a wine press to a courageous leader who defeated a vast army is an inspiration to us all. He teaches us that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to step forward in faith even when we're afraid. Just like Gideon, we may face giants in our lives: fear, doubt, insecurity, challenges that seem insurmountable. But Gideon's story reminds us that we are not alone. God is with us just as He was with Gideon. When we feel inadequate or afraid, we can remember Gideon's fleece, a tangible reminder of God's faithfulness. Gideon's story is more than just an ancient tale, it's a timeless message of hope and encouragement. Let's be like Gideon, willing to step out in faith even when we're afraid, trusting that God will fight for us and bring us victory.